Nobody can hear me talking. Okay, so for the people who are on Patreon, give me a second. I'm posting the link to this video so that you can see it. I'm going to pin this one here, and then we're going to get going. We were supposed to start around 10:30. Okay, so for the people around 10:30 and had some scheduling conflicts, so we're going to go ahead and start now, but it won't affect the content, which was my main reason for starting early, so we don't have to rush. All right, so I'm editing the link on to, there we go. Editing the link, I'm gonna notify everybody and then we're gonna get going. Okay, let me make sure it's being recorded because that's important. It's being recorded on YouTube, so I guess that's fine. All right, we are starting a new series this week. Kind of something that I kind of was working on during Passover, and it got kind of interrupted, and I think for good purpose. And so today we're going to look at this concept of purging, or Purge Me, which is the actual title of the series. And so I had some notes and I posted them onto Patreon, so you guys actually have the actual like Hebrew notes and everything that goes with it. And so today what we're going to cover is the introduction. I'm going to go over some concepts that have been kind of in my head and leave you with some practical work. I really hope that this week it restructures the way you think, the way you feel, the way you understand this concept of one sin, how God deals with sin, and the process of purging or renewing from that in its entirety. All right. I was telling the people on, we had like a meetup or a chat, and I was like, I think I'm a little nervous. I haven't done this in a while. So when I first started this, it kind of was prompted when I was going through Leviticus. I was reading through Leviticus for the Torah portion, and kind of right around 13 and 15 talks about leprosy and the process of cleansing and purging from leprosy. And in the process of reading that, I realized that some things are not just cut and dry and straightforward. And what I mean by that is the healing process is something that takes a little bit of inspection, creativity, looking at it, having the right framework and the mindset to understand what it is. And so as I was looking at it, I kept getting this word ritual that came in my head, and not ritual in the negative connotation as it's been kind of like attached to the term ritual. We think of ritual, we think of like rituals that are outside of the sanctity of the biblical text. And that is not the type of ritual we're speaking of here, although the word does have, like I said, a negative connotation. So as I was like meditating, I wrote out a little blurb for myself, and I looked at ritual. And the definition of ritual is the idea of order. And I put ritual has gotten a taboo rap. In religion, people often associate the word ritual with a primitive rite, but ritual by definition is action performed in a prescribed order. Every day we create rituals, and we either, they're supposed to deepen our personal development, and they can deepen our personal development, or they can distract us from our goals. The ritual of trained response to stimuli is super important to understand. It's this idea that when something happens, there should be a natural flow of reaction. But as the world continues to go into a state of decay, then we realize that our reactions, our understandings of things have also decayed. And that's the importance of our word studies, is to come back to the balance of what we're supposed to be understanding, what we're supposed to be doing, and how we're supposed to be moving, even as things around us move into a state of decay. So the ritual or the order, understanding the process of something, puts us into a state of constantly being able to refer back to concrete steps. But we live in a world fueled by our agreements to perform actions to achieve a particular task. When it comes to biblical ritual, it's embedded in the Torah practices of practical and ceremonial actions that help a person to achieve balance and peace in life. So that is the point. So I'm going to use that term probably a lot, but I want to give a definition, at least my definition, so that a person understood where I was coming from as I began to explain this concept of purging in a ritual process, in a process of order. And purging from what? What we're looking at particularly is a purge from sin, a purge from a particular behavior, lifestyle, way of thinking, etc. The words that we're going to deal with moving forward, I'm going to actually kind of like table that, and we're going to get directly into the word study, because I think there's some real fundamental concepts that have to be laid down that are super, super important to us kind of moving forward. The first thing is, what are you purging from? If there's a process of purge in a biblical context, then what are you purging from? Well, you must be purging from something, and most of the time that purge is from sin. You're purging from sin. So in a methodical way, the very next logical question should be, what is sin? What is this concept? What is this word? What is this that we're coming across that we need to understand so that we can enter into a space of purging? I said we weren't going to do the first word, but I guess we will really touch on it. Bet resh resh is the word that we're going to be using to start with, and we'll be looking at it next week, but it deals with being chosen. And the idea of being chosen is to be chosen for something, chosen to something, or chosen for a process. And before there is a choosing, there's an understanding. And so the process of understanding sin helps us to better understand the process of also being chosen. In Psalm 57:1 is where the concept came from. The concept is not completely rooted and embedded in this one particular verse, but this is where it struck me in a process of my study a few years ago, and that's where Purge Me came from. In Psalm 51:7, the text says, "Purge me with hyssop." And as I was looking at it this morning, I looked at the word purge, and the word for purge is also the word that we see for sin. Mind blown for me in that moment. And when I saw the word "purge me with hyssop," it made me go back to Leviticus, which kind of launched this whole idea of like this series of understanding, which is the part of Leviticus where the leper and the leper's house is cleansed with blood and hyssop. And I told you about going through the Torah portion. I was looking at it and I saw that there was a process. And the first step of the process, and I'm going to give you all the steps, we're going to cover them more concretely. The first step of the process of being purged or identifying sin and moving to a place of wholeness is identification. Second part is examination. The third part is the monitoring part. The fourth is modification. The fifth part is inspection, the final inspection. The sixth part is the ritual confirmation, so the actual process that goes into it. And the seventh part is declaring clean. So you might ask, how did I get that? I looked at the process in Leviticus when certain things were, when there was a plague in a house or when something was imbalanced. And it literally made me think about the body. Everything starts, physical, and then it goes into the spiritual, of course. And so when there's sin in our lives, and when there's sin in our lives, most of the time it enters into our bodies, or it has a propensity to infect everything, and us included, everyone around us and us included, then it looks very much like the process of there being disease in a camp. And so I looked at the process that Yah gave to the priests on how to get certain diseases out of the camp, and literally applied that to the process of what we go through and how we exit out of different spaces. And I realized that there was a direct correlation with the need to identify, to examine, to monitor the progress or the process, or see what is happening, to look at it, not just look at that one thing, but to look all around it. In the process with, let's look at leprosy. The first thing was identifying it. Does this look like leprosy? Second thing was examine it. Well, does it have hair coming out of it? Is it scab? Is it scaly? And then you monitor it. Is it growing? Is it staying in one space? Is this something that's already been dealt with, and now we're just looking at the physical effects of something that is all in its process of healing? Modification. The idea that the healing isn't linear. There are times when you look at it, you try something, shut the person up for a few days, come back and check on it again, and see if there is progress or if there isn't progress. The next phase was the final inspection, to come and say, okay, we went through all the modifications. We tried all these different ways. Let's look at it one more time and see if there's something that we can do about it. And then the last part was the ritual confirmation, where then the blood of the turtle dove or the bulls, the rams, or whatever is brought in, it's sprinkled. The place is then ritually cleansed after it's been physically or medically cleansed. And there's the ritual cleansing. And then there's a declaration that this is now clean, or the declaration of this is now, this is still unclean, and we have to start that process over again. And this process moved me in a very, very deep way, because so often when we deal with one another, or we deal with issues, we stop right here at the first phase, which is identification. We identify that there's something wrong, and then it's condemnation. But the biblical teaching, when it comes to the law, teaches that there is a process to understanding, and it's done at the right hands with the right people who have an understanding of Yah's word and have been called to that particular function and purpose. Okay, so I put my first note, because we're going to start just first with identification. The identification of the ailment was not the treatment. The identification of the ailment is never the treatment. Is it a part of the treatment? No, because you don't know what to do just by looking at something. Sometimes, yes, but the identification is the beginning of the process for treatment. Society has become masters of identifying sin, but poor practitioners at prescribing the path of purification. As a nation of priests, as it's been put in the text, we have been chosen as ambassadors of purification for ourselves and for others. And the process requires looking at, being honest about, and being in work with our own mess first. In the process in Leviticus, the priest was required to identify and offer for himself before Yah and before the people, and then he was able to serve. This walk is not a service of perfection, but you are going to get dirty in the process and then return back to the one who does the perfecting. So purge me is a process of laying off the burden of sin in order, and I say sin in this way because we're going to understand what it is, because a lot of us have a convoluted understanding of what that is. We're going to lay off the burden of sin in order to continue forward on the journey. It's a path you return to. Purge me is, hopefully, when we're done with the series, is going to operate as a tool and a path that you return to when you identify yourself in a state that is not consistent with the standard of alignment as prescribed by our Creator. It is the biblical ritual process for this journey that is called life when it comes to how we are interacting with a fallen world. I want to say this, and I want to say this explicitly, because the next thing we're going to deal with is this defining of sin. I've mentioned the word a couple of times, and we're not going to move forward without defining it. So the question is, or I guess the thing I want you to think about is the idea that you are not sin. You personally are not sin. And that's a big thing, because a lot of people identify people with behaviors, and then you lose track of the person in the process, and then you lose the opportunity to act as an ambassador or as a priest, directing that person toward the path of purification. A person is not sin. Sin is something that a person, that people do, that separates them from the holiness of the Creator. The person is not the sin is the sin. For instance, in the book of Leviticus, the house was not considered the sin. What was happening in the house was considered sin until there was zero opportunity to purge the house of whatever it was, mold, leprosy, whatever was plaguing the house. When the house rejected the treatment, then the house was destroyed. But so often the treatment is not prescribed because we see the flaw in the house and we condemn the house right away. And we do that with people all the time. We see the physical representation of their, and I'll say it again with quotes, sin, and then we don't offer them the process of purification. We don't offer them the ritual because we have condemned them already. So what is sin? Sin in the Hebrew comes from the word het, tet, aleph. Het, to separate, right? To separate. Tet, to surround. And olive, head, person, first. So this idea can have a few different connotations. It can literally mean to separate and surround, to be treaded. That means like for punishment. It can mean to separate and to surround, so that the man can be contained. so that we can see and look at in war what happens when a person is captured. They're normally stripped all the way down and they're observed. And it's so interesting because the idea of sin in the context that we're going to use it, in the context it's used in the text, is the idea of to strip down and to see the problem. Often sin is looked at as the ultimate end, but it's actually has a root cause. All right. So that is like, I want it to be our first understanding. Also, sin and purge in the text in Psalm 51:7 and a few other places have the same meaning, which means that with embedded in sin, the identification of sin is also the process to get out of it. So we'll kind of see that in a second. But I want you to look at this. Sin is done in a few ways, but I'll give these two. Sin is either against man, or I guess I should say three, because I can use man in two different ways. So sin is against man, against self, our fellow man, fellow woman, fellow folks, man, woman, self, and then against God. That's very, very important. It's very important. Those are the levels that we experience this. But then the question is, what is sin? What is sin in the biblical definition? Sin literally means I'm going to give you like a list. Sin means to miss the mark, meaning there's a target. You aim at the target. When you miss it, that is the idea, where we get the definition of sin. The idea that we have now that sin is like a type of bad person is a construct that's been developed over time that's not really consistent with the idea of sin. There's a difference between a sin and a sinner, and we'll get to that in a second. The idea of sin is this: to miss the mark, to miss the way. So like, oh, that's the way, that's not the way, right? To make a wrong turn, to do something too fast and make a mistake because you're rushing the process, to miss the wisdom in a lesson or in life. Sin is also endangering your life, to cause someone else to miss the mark. Sin is leading someone astray, right? So that means that they're following you, thinking you know the way, and then you lead them into a path that is not the way. Sin, there is the sin of your palate. So that's also like what you eat, what you put into your body, what you're desiring as well. So that could be on a spiritual idea. Like, what is your spiritual palate? What's your spiritual flavor, right? Sin is something that everyone does. Nobody is exempt from sin. You can sin with your mouth. You can sin or err unwittingly. You can sin in iniquity, which I would put it like this: in inequity, when you don't prescribe something equitable and you only prescribe something equal. The Bible deals heavily in equity when it talks about the prescription or looking at something. And when you consider everything that everybody does the same, or when you consider a person sin, that is inequitable, because there are things that happen in people's lives, things that happen along their path. There are things that people fall into. There are wrong turns that people make, and you cannot judge them based upon your understanding. It has to be done equitably according to the scripture. I feel like I'm like, as I'm saying that, I have so many things kind of running through my head in the process of making that statement. Because equity is very important. The process of proper judgment and equity is mentioned over and over and over and over again. For instance, if you're on a road and you're driving and the GPS says goes right, and you look at the road and you're like, and you've all done it. I know we've all done it. You look at the road and you're following GPS and it says, all right, and on the next turn, make a right. And you look, you're like, how am I going to make a right here? And the only logical way looks like you got to go like this way and then actually like make a left, and you make a left. And then the thing says rerouting. That by definition is sin, right? There was a path. You looked at the path and you made a judgment call based upon what you didn't see or didn't understand, and you ended up on a different road. Torah, though, is the thing that says rerouting. Sinner, or a person who has a heart to presumptuously sin, or a person who is turned away from direction, would say, well, I'm already starting left. Let me just keep going left. A person who sins but has the opportunity at correction has this thing, whether it's Syria or whatever, who says rerouting. And when it gives you the route to get back to the proper path, a person with a heart for the creator is going to then go and get on the rerouting path and get back in the direction they're going. That's why David was considered blameless. It wasn't that he didn't make turns or make bad judgment calls or do things. It was that when the rerouting signal came up, he got back on the path and going toward the goal or toward the destination. We have to stop looking at turns people make and condemning them in that way, and then keeping them or being so noisy that they miss the rerouting call to get back on the right path. We have to be very careful if we're supposed to be a nation of priests, because we're supposed to be pointing to the rerouting path, not deterring people or beating them down so much that now they're worse off than they were when they made the turn that they made a poor judgment call on. And what you consider to be a poor judgment call, you need to take that to the Father too. Because what may be something that you would never do doesn't necessarily go along with what a person would do based upon their life experiences and what they've been through. We have to get to know people. We have to do the full process. If you consider yourself a person that's supposed to be identifying or pointing out something to people about their life or their sin or how they're walking, then you should also be in a process of going through and being willing to work through every layer of what that is. It's very important. All right, so I kind of gave you sin, the difference between a sin and a sinner. And then the next thing is what sin does. What sin does if we get stuck in it. So when we sin, and if you continue to sin and you don't reroute and go through the process of purging, the process of purging is a process of rerouting and then getting back on the right track. If you just continue and you continue going down a path, you continue trying to fix things in your own power, then you do something called you incur guilt. It's like incurring interest. It's like incurring debt, where you add burden onto burden onto burden. The first mention of this word that we have for sin did not take place with the Mosaic law. First place we actually see it is with, in the sense of this word. We see it in Genesis 4:7 when the creator is talking to Cain. And he says, sin lieth at the door. Like if you don't do right, if you don't choose right, sin is going to wait for you, and it's going to try to throw on, it's going to crouch, and it's going to attack you. The idea is that when you go off, and if you don't quickly get back on, then what happens is the sin is going to then jump on you and lay a burden upon you. It's going to lay a burden upon you, and it makes you heavy, and it makes you depressed, and it makes you anxious, and it confuses you. It gets in your mind. It keeps you from getting back to the path. Now you can't hear the signals. That's why I say it's very important not to be the person that adds on, not to be the adversary in the situation. The adversary is adversary enough. When a person is laden with something, it's not your responsibility to then tack it on or then to make the burden heavier. Your job is to say, okay, I know this happened, but let's go here. Let's get here. Let's get back on the path. That's the job of a nation of priests. But if you stay on it, or if you let it go, it's going to incur debt. The debt gets higher and higher and higher if you don't pay it, right? If you don't go through the process, if you don't let it down, if you don't let it go, then interest begins to occur. And that happens in the mind, the interest in the mind that happens as we ruminate over our situations and our problems. And then as it incurs debt, it's going to take away the quality of your life. Right? Everybody who's been in debt knows that if you get in debt and it's too high, it diminishes the quality of your life. It's like this nagging thing in the background that keeps going. How does sin diminish the quality of your life? The guilt of sin will steal your joy and cause you to live in the past. That's why the law helps us identify the sin and gives us the remedy for laying aside the burden of it. The word for sin mimics the process, right? So if it means to miss, once I know that I missed, by knowing I missed, I can take a deductive reasoning and look at where I missed, and then look at and ask or pray for or seek people to then help me get back based upon where I missed. But if you're denying where you missed, or if you're denying that you missed at all, then guess what? There's no way to help you get back. So if a person has leprosy, I'm going to use that because it's like the basis. If a person has leprosy, and they're like, no, it's not leprosy. I'm losing pigment. No, it's not leprosy. Like, but it's scabbing and it's boiling. It's no. Actually, I'm having an allergic reaction. Oh no. This isn't leprosy. Actually, I went somewhere and they said it was this. And all this time that you could have been being healed from what it really was, which was leprosy, it got worse and worse and worse until you literally put yourself in a position where sometimes the only healing is death. meaning the only way to stop what's happening is there's still a process of repentance and going through, but now it's too far gone and now you're going to die from it, where the sin doesn't have to be something you die from. You don't have to die in your sin. Yes, the wages of sin is death. We all die, but you don't have to die and then experience a second death. If you don't understand that, go watch the videos called The Deaths that are on the YouTube channel. And I can have somebody post it in the chat for people on Patreon. Okay, so big, lot of stuff I know with this idea of sin, it's really important too, because I know people are at different parts in their walk and in their journey. There are people who are struggling with the concept of the necessity of Messiah. And a lot of that comes from a misunderstanding of the theme and the understanding of the text. Doesn't make it that a person is something's wrong with them. It just means that there needs to be more application to understanding what the actual text is meant for. And I went through that process. It was a purging process for me as well. So that's why I bring it up, because the next thing I'm going to tell you is when you look at the process, the overall process and the ritual process of identifying sin and coming out of it, a lot of times we go through all the steps. We're like, no, I know what it is. And I've gone through this and I've done this, and I've done that. But the last step of it, the ultimate last step in that declaring clean, is literally right here in Messiah. Because the purpose of Messiah is to purge the conscience from sin. Paul talks about the idea that what the law was weak to do. And it doesn't mean the law was weak, that it doesn't work. It works perfectly. But what it couldn't do is purge your mind from it. Over and over again, you go through this process, and eventually the debt was incurring by interest of the sin debt, because it hadn't been paid. It was just put into a transactory, like in a pretty much in a bank, in a hold, until the time came where the debt could be paid in full, because nothing, no blood, no bulls, no goats, your own personal obedience can't pay for it. And so in our process now, because we're on the other side of that, Messiah is the ritual process we look to when we choose to lay aside the burden. And it is in and enlist in the process of purification. If at the end of your journey, gone through these steps, and you still don't feel clean, you have to then realize that the debt has been paid in full. And a lot of people end up in that space where they get the law part right, they get the process part right, but they don't get the releasing part right, because it was paid in full. But the payment being paid in full does not negate the process. And many of you can attest to that you have had it on both sides. You've been within the common religion construct where you're like, oh, it's already paid, but then it's still there. And then you have it in the sense of the legal side of it, the law side of it, where you're doing the work, but then you feel burdened still. It's not either or, it's both. In the book of Revelation, it says that it's not just one thing. It's not just the testimony of Hamashiach, but it is also keeping the commandments of Yah. Because what do? The commandments help us to identify and understand why we need to be on the process. And then we have the ultimate payment paid so that we can do the process and be completely done when or completely healed when our process is done, found wanting nothing. All right, so now that you know what sin is, then the next thing is going to be the follow-up. So then how does Yah think about sin? It's what people have told you. It's what you may have learned in religious constructs. It's what you may have burdened yourself with. It's maybe what you read. I'm going to, and I hope this helps, we're going to divorce from this idea that of God and how God views sin. I think it's very, very important that we do that. It's super important. And the reason why it's so important is because if you don't change your mind, if you don't change your viewpoint to his viewpoint, you are going to be adding and heaping burdens to yourself based upon the enemy within you and not based upon the love that Yah has for you. I said earlier that you are not sin. A person is not sin. Sin is something that people do. And then if you continue to do it, then you are identifying with it. That's making you a sinner and then putting you in a place of condemnation or punishment. But that's not the only view that Yah has of sin, because he understands that there's nobody perfect. No one is perfect. Nobody doesn't sin. People who are telling you, oh, I used to, it's because they've determined, they have a definition of their own, not the definition of the text, of what sin is. Ooh, I just realized something. I left off a definition, which I think is very important. Another definition of sin, I have to give you that long list. Sin is also to miss the mark with yourself or to lose yourself. That is also idea of sin. You see that? Like, so the idea of not understanding yourself or not seeing yourself or not attending to yourself and not worrying about yourself is sin. The idea of also losing the idea of who Yah says you are is sin. So we have all these other things that we view as sin, but that's also sin. When we get so caught up in our heads about what people say about what the world says, we sin, we miss the mark because Yah has given us a target of what he believes we are, and that's what we're supposed to be focused on. If you're kind of missing that one, go back to the video where I talked about the narrative. So literally, sin is also to be beside yourself. In a lot of Hebrew homes, parents will say, have you gotten beside yourself? This is you. This is you not being who you are. When we are not who we are, when we abandon the authenticity of who we are, who we've been raised to be, who Yah has brought us up to be, who we've been cultivated to be in the realness of ourselves, we get beside ourselves. That is sin, because the mark is you, the whole you, the you that Yah sees. And then beside yourself is anything other than that. When we get beside ourselves, that is sin. And we get beside ourselves sometimes because of sin. And we also can get beside ourselves due to the woes of this world. Depression and anxiety are not sin in the sense that it's a sin like I'm going to hell because I'm doing these things. That you have to leave your mind from that. And we're going to get to that in just a second. Getting depression and anxiety are sin because they cause you to look at yourself in a different way than Yah sees you. And so the remedy in so many ways for sin is understanding how Yah sees sin and understanding how Yah sees you and loves you. And knowing that and believing that and understanding, like I said, that you, when you do things, are not sin, but that sin is something that people do. And it's not until you fully go into to fully agree to the opposite narrative, that of the adversary, that of your lower self, that of people around you, that you turn into this beside yourself person. And that's when you're given over to a reprobate, to that mind that doesn't want to focus on who Yah says that you are. All right. So I gave you who we sin against. We sin against ourselves, we sin against our fellow person, and then we sin against Elohim. So now we're going to divorce this idea of God and sin and how he thinks about sin. People tell you that God thinks about sin in one way. God thinks about sin in this way. He punishes it. That's it. He punishes sin. That's one way. I'm going to give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 other ways based in scripture that the creator looks at sin. I'm going to leave you with this as your homework, and we're going to join back together next week to not only unpack this, but to now look at why this process of purging, this process of identification and understanding and modification, inspection, and then being declaring clean is so right for right now. Okay. How Yah does with sin. The first one that everybody says, they put all their eggs in this basket. He punishes it. That's Exodus 32 and 34. That means to subdue it, right? To take it down. Punishing something, right, though, in its proper context does not always mean negative. Sometimes we chastise something to stop the behavior because we know that chastisement in that one instance can stop the behavior from happening long term. There's a particular point in scripture, though, that Yah gets to a point where he's like, what does it matter if I chastise you? Because your heart is hard. It doesn't matter, right? So then you know that that's not the only way. Yah is a perfect parent. And I hope that as you look at this, you see a benevolent, loving father, and you pick up those ways and apply them to your life, into your home, into your everyday practice with people around you, especially with your children. So the first thing that I'm not even saying it's first because this is in no particular order, but the one that people put the most weight on is that what Yah does with sin, he punishes it. Here's another way Yah handles sin. Job 10 and 6, he asks about it. He inquires about it. You can go all the way back to the beginning. Before the punishment of Adam and Hawa, asked Adam, hey, Adam, where are you? What's going on, bro? Before the curse of Cain, Yah asked about it. Let's talk about it. Let us reason together. Hey, Cain, where's your brother? The asking about it is to look at the condition of the heart. When Yah sends Nathan to David and he gives him the parable, that was an inquiry. It was because on your own, you're not quite getting this. And so let me do a heart check and see if I bring it to your attention, what your response is going to be. Are you going to enter? Are you going to reroute? Or are you going to keep going in the wrong direction? A loving parent inquires, asks about. The next thing that how Yah handles sin is he watches over it. In Job 14:6, he watches it to see the matter out. Like, okay, you turned wrong, but let me see what you're gonna do. And I'm gonna ask. I'm gonna watch you. You have enough in you to get back on the path. Let me see if you're gonna listen to me and do it, or if you're gonna keep going in your own way. Hosea 13:12, he stores it up. Sometimes, Yah lets it pile up. Long suffering. We've done this as parents with our kids, right? Where you just wait to see, like, I'm just gonna watch and see if he's gonna keep leaving that thing on the floor. I'm just gonna watch and see. And then when we finally, like, we in a Hebrew home, we haul off on you, then you're like, wait, what? No, I literally gave you all these ample opportunities, watched you walk over it over and over and over again. Now I'm pop you. So sometimes he stores it up. Let me just wait. Not stores it up so I can say, I got you. No, stores it up to see what you're going to do about it. Being long suffering, let me see what you're going to do. You see a difficulty. We see it sometimes with babies where they get frustrated and they cry because they want to get something, they want to do something. And we just sit back and watch. Because sometimes it's the process of going through it that is the learning, where you won't repeat it again. And that's why I say that the error is the error, or the missing the mark, does not always result in punishment, because sometimes it results in a lesson in the process. We want punishment for everything. We want punishment for everybody. Where Yah's like, sometimes I might just watch. And I might just nudge a little bit. But it's every time you make a turn doesn't mean that now you got to get out the car. You can't drive. Here's a ticket because you made a left turn when the GPS said to make a right. So you guys are misapplying Torah because there's no love in it. When a person makes a left, the police will say, boop, boop, didn't Siri say to make a right? Here's an infraction. No, we wait long enough. Now, if you see a person just driving around in circles, you might pull them over and go, hey, you lost? Where are we supposed to be going? Would you like directions? Inquiry, right? Storing it up, watching over it, the processes. Okay, let's see. The next one, how Yah handles sin. I have two. I have Psalm 32:32 and 1 Samuel 15:25. He forgives it. Another way Yah handles sin, Exodus 34:9. He pardons it. You know what pardon is? A pardon is, you deserve it. But I said, you know what? I'm gonna wipe this clean. Go ahead. You get a free lease on life. I'm not even gonna apply that to your account. He pardons it. Another way Yah handles sin, 1 Samuel 12:13. He removes it. He sees it in you and he removes it, whether it's to remove the desire, to remove the things, remove the people. So when Yah removes something, y'all, sometimes it's so he doesn't have to punish you. Let you sit with that. Sometimes when Yah removes something, so he doesn't have to punish you. How Yah handles sin, he casts it into the deep. Micah 7:19. That means I'm put it so far away that you can't even go back and get it. It's not that he's going to remember. It's that you will keep going back and grabbing that thing unless he puts it so far away from you that you can't reach it. Cast it into the sea of forgetfulness. Takes it away. Another way Yah handles sin is Isaiah 6:7. He covers it. He applies something to it. What does that mean? So that other people can't look on it while he deals with you. There's a Psalm, I think it's Psalm 19, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, if I'm wrong, I'll add it in the comments, where David thanks Yah for not exposing his secret sin. He covers it so he can deal with you with it in private. We need to learn how to do that. It says that love covers a multitude of sin. Doesn't mean that we sweep it under the rug. No, it means that we deal with it privately, so that the person can show Yah publicly. We cover it. Because we know sometimes some things exposed will be grievous to people. We don't want that for people. Another way Yah handles sin. Did I give the verse where he covers it? Psalm 79:9. He makes atonement for it. So then Yah becomes the one. So people are like, I don't understand how Yah can make it, because he's been doing it from the beginning. He made the atonement. He set up the system for the sacrificial system, so that he could still commune with us in a temporary system. But he also set up a system for long-term atonement, which was to literally purchase his bride himself. So that's an Old Testament concept, not a New Testament concept. He atones for it. Oh wait, I think I mixed my verses up. I'm sorry. So from the deep, I'm sorry, was Micah 7:19. Isaiah 6:7 is he covers it. Psalm 79:9 is he makes atonement for it. And then Daniel 9:24, how Yah handles sin, he'll make an end of it. Eventually, he knows this is something that is going to constantly plague us. So eventually, he's going to make an end of sin. He's going to completely eradicate it, completely do away with it. So the only thing that we deal with is a lesson and not the punishment. This life, when you have Yah and you go through the process, is not a punishment. It's just a process, a place to process and a place to work out the things that have gotten in to us. And eventually he's going to do away with it altogether. He's going to cast sin and death up completely away, and there will only be life. The other way that Yah deals with sin is he will blot it out, literally blot it out. If you ever got a stain gets on something, and you take a little bit of an agent and you blot it out. That's how he's going to blot it out. In our case, he blots it out with with water and blood. So then the only thing left is his sacrifice. That's the only thing you can see. Only thing you can see is, I know there's something under there, but this stain, the blood stain, is bigger than the stain that you created. Yeah. So that only when a person looks, that's the only thing that they should be able to identify is, no, it's something, but this is blocking my view of seeing it. That's the idea of also atonement. It means to kafar, it means to cover it, means to smear it over, so that whatever's trying to penetrate to get to the contents within that are being saved, like Noah and the boat, when they kafar the inside and out, pitched it within and without, whatever was trying to get in the outside, the turmoil of the outside couldn't get to the precious content in the inside that was being saved. That is why atonement is so important. How Yah handles sin, Psalm 51:4 says he will cleanse you from it. He's not afraid of sin. He's not like us, where we look at sin and the nastiness and the ugliness of people, and we can only see that. He's like, I can clean that. I can fix that. Another way Yah handles sin is he will not remember it. When you go through the process, and when you go through and you literally go through that whole thing, Yah's not gonna say, remember that last time? That's you. That's not him. When you go through the whole thing, he doesn't remember it. Yah is very, very in the present with you. I've taken care of what you've done already, and we're going to work on the things you're going to do. And even those have already been taken care of as well. He's not going to remember. He's not holding that against you. So if that's happening to you in your mind, that's not him. And the last one, Deuteronomy 9. Oh, that was Isaiah 43:25. The last one is Deuteronomy 9:27. He will not look upon it. He will not look upon it. I think those are some very, very powerful concepts. I know it was very, very healing for me internally to go through and look at that information, look at sin, look at what it is, and then look at it alongside how Yah deals with it. And it's very important that that goes into our head first, because it's one thing to put somebody or talk to somebody about being on a process of healing or purging, but I can't get that part right in my head. If you can get this part right in your head, then your cycles of healing are going to be exponentially bountiful. They're going to be fruitful. They're going to be like a fruitful vine. I didn't sit right here because of that word. I didn't have that in my notes, but like these vines, they're going to be fruitful. They're going to put on, they're going to grow, and adversity will not cause them to shrivel or cower back, but it'll cause them to stretch forth their arms and their vines even further. That is the goal for this. It's not to remind you of another way that you've got it wrong, or remind you of another thing that you're not doing right. But no, we need to see now what it is, how Yah sees it, and then we're going to look at the process. And as we begin to identify different things, we're going to look at it with his gentle eye on it. We're going to look at it with his eye on it, because sometimes we doing the most. Yah's not doing it. We're doing it to ourselves. Yah is a loving, gracious, benevolent Father that we are going to get to know, because to rise up as daughters of Zion, we have to know that, so that when anybody comes at us with our past, with who we are in a moment, we know we have a place to go back to. And when we are off, we go to our process that we're going to learn, or that we have learned, and we go back to it, and we handle ourselves gently. We handle ourselves with care. We're going to do things softer, because Yah has been soft with us. If you're still here, literally under the sound of my voice and hearing the word, Yah wants that from you. He wants to work out something in you. He wants you to bear fruit. He wants you to be a testimony of his love and his kindness and his graciousness. He doesn't want you to carry on broken, and then apply your harsh handed brokenness onto other people. You're supposed to be gentle, kind, kind-hearted, and a testimony of what he has been to us. I hope that this intro got you on fire, got you ready, because we're going to go on a little journey. We're going to go on a little journey because it's necessary. Pray for me. I say that because part of my process is, whenever I start something and I know it's impactful, I also know that there is an inner me, there is a inner me, there is outer people, and there's everything that rises up to wash it out. So pray that this word and the seed that Yah's planted doesn't fall by the wayside and doesn't get picked up by the birds, and that it doesn't get choked out, that it doesn't sprout up too fast, that it's good seed and it falls on my heart well, and it falls on your hearts well, and it bears fruit. Pray for mental, spiritual, emotional protection, and pray that I continue to walk in the call and the path that he has prescribed for me, so that I can share and do what is right by his word for those who just need a little priming of the pump so they can do the rest of the work themselves. All right, that's all I have. That's all I have today. We are going to follow up with what was I going to say? With Patreon. So I'm going to let the people who are on Patreon jump in and hear what's going on here. All right. Shalom.